I've always believed that a man should have at least one place in this world where he can breathe. For me, that place has always been the lake behind my home. Every sunrise, I walked down to that dock, held my father's old fishing rod in my hand, and felt like he was still standing beside me. He taught me how to cast on this very shoreline. He taught me patience, respect for the water, and how to clear my mind when the world felt too heavy. That lake wasn't just part of my property, it was part of my heart. But on one quiet morning, when the sky was still orange and the water still calm, everything changed. I had just cast my line when I heard the sharp click of heels behind me. Before I could turn, someone's hand reached out, grabbed my fishing line, and yanked it out of the water so hard it nearly cut my fingers. The splash echoed out across the lake, and my heart dropped. Standing there, blocking the sun, was Megan Carlisle, the HOA president, arms crossed, eyes full of anger, like she'd caught a criminal instead of a man fishing on his own dock. "You can't do that here," she snapped. For a moment, I thought she was joking. Who walks onto someone's private property at sunrise and rips a fishing line out of their hands? But then she held out a bright yellow slip of paper. My first HOA fine. Unauthorized lake usage, it said, as if I'd broken into her backyard instead of standing on land I paid for. I felt heat rise in my face. This dock, this lake, this exact spot was where my father taught me everything about fishing, about patience, about life. And here she was acting like I had no right to be here at all. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my property." "Maybe the land is," she said coldly, "but the lake isn't. The HOA controls all access, and you're breaking the rules." She said it with such confidence that, for a second, I wondered if I had missed something in the paperwork when I bought the house. But no. I remembered reading everything. I remembered making sure this lake was something I could enjoy freely. Still, her tone made it clear she wasn't here to discuss anything. She was here to dominate. Before I could say another word, she turned her back and walked away, leaving me standing there with a fine in my hand and my father's fishing rod shaking from anger. The rest of the day felt heavy, confusing, wrong. I kept replaying her words in my head, trying to understand how she could claim something that didn't feel like hers. I started digging through my documents just to reassure myself that I hadn't imagined owning this shoreline. But that evening, just as the sun dipped behind the trees, I stepped outside and saw something taped to my front door. Another paper, bright red this time. A lien warning. Not even 24 hours had passed. The fine wasn't even due yet, and they were already threatening my home. Right then, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the start of something much bigger than a fishing line. The morning after Megan ripped the fishing line out of my hands, I woke up hoping it had all been some strange misunderstanding. Maybe she'd been having a bad day. Maybe she'd overreacted. I wanted to believe the situation could still settle down. But the moment I looked out my bedroom window, I realized things were only getting worse. 3 people from the HOA stood on my dock, clipboards in hand, tape measures stretched across the wooden boards, acting like investigators at a crime scene. One of them even crouched down, taking pictures as if the dock I'd repaired with my own hands was somehow illegal. I didn't even have my coffee yet, and already my stomach tightened with anger. I stepped outside and walked toward them. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked. None of them answered right away. They exchanged looks, like kids caught where they shouldn't be. Finally, the tallest guy cleared his throat and said, "Routine inspection. HOA guidelines. On my dock? Without my permission." He shrugged. "We're allowed to assess any structure that affects the lake." It was the same tone Megan had used the day before. Cold, confident, rehearsed. Like they'd all been trained to remind me this wasn't really my land anymore. Standing there watching them jot things down, I felt something I'd never felt on my own property. Unwelcome. Like the soil under my feet somehow didn't belong to me. An hour later, a stack of new violation notices appeared in my mailbox. dock railing too low, unauthorized structure near shoreline, improper fishing equipment usage. Half of them didn't even make sense. It was as if they were inventing problems just to break me down piece by piece. And while I held those papers in my hands, one thought kept circling in my mind. This is not why I bought this home. I came here after my father passed away because I needed peace. I needed space to breathe, to think, to remember him without noise or chaos. The lake reminded me of all the times he taught me about courage, patience, and knowing when to stand up for yourself. He used to say, "A man's home should give him peace, not take it away." Now standing there with those violation slips, I felt like my refuge was slipping away from me. Later that day, my neighbor Tom stopped by. He's a quiet man in his 60s, friendly, the kind who waves every time he drives past. He saw the stack of violations in my hand and shook his head. "They're targeting you," he said. "Ever since Megan took over, things have gotten worse around here." Tom wasn't the only one who seemed bothered. I noticed Linda, a nervous-looking HOA board member, watching from a distance earlier. When our eyes met, she gave me a tired, apologetic look, as if she knew what was happening but couldn't speak up. By the end of the week, the HOA had visited my property 4 times. 4. Each time they left new threats, warnings, or claims of lake misuse. It didn't matter what I did. They wanted control, and they wanted me to feel it, and they succeeded. I felt isolated, cornered, surrounded by people who were supposed to help maintain the neighborhood but instead acted like guards enforcing someone else's power. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get stranger, I found it. An envelope. No name, no return address. Just slid under my front door. Inside were photos. Zoomed in, grainy pictures of me fishing on my dock. Pictures I never knew were taken. Those photos kept running through my mind all night. I barely slept, lying awake wondering who was watching me, who stood close enough to take those pictures without me ever noticing. The next morning, I went outside with the envelope still in my hand. I held the photos up, lining up the angle, turning my head, trying to understand where they had come from. And then I saw it. High up in a tall pine tree, tucked between 2 thick branches, something metallic glinted in the sunlight. I squinted, stepped closer, and my heart sank. It was a camera. Small, black, aimed directly at my dock and the back windows of my home. Someone had mounted it there deliberately. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. The lake had always been my safe place. My home had always been where I could breathe. But now, looking at that camera lens pointed straight at me, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Fear. Deep, shaking, angry fear. I climbed up far enough to confirm it. A fully functioning camera, aiming right at my life. I didn't even go back inside. I marched straight toward the HOA office and demanded to speak with Megan. When she walked out, she didn't look surprised or confused. She looked annoyed, like I was an inconvenience. "There's a camera pointed at my home," I said, trying hard to keep my voice steady. "Do you know anything about it?" She smirked. "Maybe you should stop breaking community rules and there wouldn't be a need to monitor certain areas." "So you admit it?" I asked. "I didn't say that," she replied, shrugging. "But cameras are legal if they help protect the neighborhood." "That camera isn't protecting anything," I said. "It's spying." She rolled her eyes. "If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't worry." That sentence hit me harder than the fine she slapped on me. It told me everything I needed to know. Megan didn't care about rules, she cared about control. And she didn't care who she violated to get it. When I got home, the harassment didn't slow down. It got worse. New complaints started appearing every day. Noise disturbance. Trash visible from lakefront. Dangerous equipment stored on property. All lies. All fabricated. I called the county sheriff's office, and the deputy explained privacy laws in simple terms. A camera cannot legally be used to record someone's private property without permission. Whoever placed it there had crossed a serious line. That's when the truth finally hit me. The HOA wasn't acting out of concern. They weren't following rules. They were targeting me, watching me, trying to push me into a corner until I broke or gave up. And Megan was leading it. Every violation, every complaint, every threat. It was all building toward something. The HOA started sending letters saying I needed to follow lake rules that I had never seen, never agreed to, and never signed. It was a game, and they were tightening the rules one by one. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. Late one afternoon, while I was trying to clear my head by fixing a loose board on the dock, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No explanation, just a formal printed notice. Mandatory HOA hearing. Multiple violations. Potential penalties. Suspension of rights, fines, and property-related actions. They weren't just spying on me. They were coming for my home. Walking into that HOA clubhouse felt like walking into an ambush. After finding that surveillance camera and receiving the hearing notice, I told myself I would go in calm, prepared, and ready to defend myself. But the moment I opened the door, I realized they never intended to hear me out at all. Every board member was already seated around a long table, papers stacked high in front of them. And before I could even sit down, Megan lifted her hand and said, "All in favor of approving the violations against Mr. Harris, raise your hands." 5 hands shot up instantly. I hadn't said a single word. I froze in the doorway, stunned. "Hold on," I said. "You're voting before I even know what the charges are?" Megan didn't bother looking at me. "These hearings move faster when we don't waste time with long arguments," she replied. "Please sit down." But sitting didn't help. She spoke over me every time I opened my mouth. Whenever I tried to explain or correct something, she cut in with, "You already had ample time to comply," or, "This is not the time for excuses." Then she placed a thick stack of papers in front of me. Fines, violations, warnings, all folded together like they'd been collecting evidence for months. For noise, for dock damage, for unsafe conduct near lakefront. None of it true. Some of them even listed dates I wasn't home. I flipped through the pages, each one worse than the last, and something inside me tightened. I'm not a man who gets rattled easily. I've lived through loss, setbacks, and long nights alone. But sitting there, with all those eyes on me, I felt smaller than I ever had before. They weren't listening. They weren't questioning. They were following Megan like she was the judge, jury, and executioner. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Linda. Quiet, anxious Linda, watching me. She wasn't raising her hand. Like the others, she wasn't joining in on Megan's comments. Instead, when Megan turned away for a moment, Linda slipped a folded note across the table toward me. I opened it slowly under my palm. "She's lying about the lake," it read. "It's not hers to control." My heart started beating faster. I looked at Linda, but she quickly glanced down at her lap, too scared to meet my eyes again. What did she know? What was Megan hiding? And why was she working so hard to push me out or break me down? It all suddenly made sense. The camera, the violations, the fine for fishing, the warnings, the threats. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about community safety. This was about something bigger, something Megan didn't want anyone else to discover. By the time the hearing ended, they had approved nearly every fine. They told me I had 30 days to pay or face further action. The words felt like a noose tightening around my home. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit me hard. For a few seconds, I just stood there, hands on my hips, trying to breathe through the frustration boiling inside me. Tom, my neighbor, approached quietly from the parking lot. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd heard more than he wanted to. "Walk with me," he said. We stopped near the edge of the lot, and he lowered his voice. "You need to check the old county lake records," he told me, "before she finds a way to bury them." I stared at him. "Why?" I asked, but Tom only shook his head. "Because nothing she told you today is the truth." The next morning, I drove straight to the county office with Tom's warning echoing in my head. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe some old zoning note, maybe a line in a document I'd overlooked. But I never imagined the truth would hit me as hard as it did. The county building was quiet. the kind of place where old paperwork goes to sleep. I walked up to the clerk's desk and explained what I needed to know. Who actually owned the lake behind my home? The clerk, an older man with silver glasses and a calm voice, nodded and disappeared into the back room. I waited, tapping my fingers against my thigh, trying to steady the frustration that had been building for days. When he finally returned, he carried a large rolled-up map under his arm and a folder filled with property records. "Let's take a look," he said. He spread the map across the counter. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Edges faded, corners curling. He traced a line along the lake's border, then stepped back, eyebrows knitting together. The expression on his face changed from confusion to surprise, then to something close to concern. "This can't be right," he murmured. "Let me double-check." He flipped through the folder, comparing documents, rechecking ownership names, parcel numbers. The longer he looked, the more unsettled he became. Finally, he let out a slow breath and looked up at me. "Sir," he said, "your HOA doesn't own the lake. Not a single inch of it." I felt my chest tighten. Not in fear this time, but in disbelief. For a moment, I didn't even move. After everything Megan had done, every fine, every threat, every accusation, she never had the authority at all. "What do you mean they don't own it?" I asked quietly. He tapped the map again. "This lake belongs to a private investor. It always has. The HOA has no legal claim over it. They cannot enforce rules on it, they cannot fine you for using it, and they definitely can't control access to it." Relief washed over me so fast my hands almost shook. But anger wasn't far behind. All the humiliation, the spying, the harassment, it had been built on a lie. A lie Megan repeated with a straight face. A lie she used to turn the entire HOA against me. The clerk continued, "HOAs only have authority over land written into their charter or deeded to them by the community developer. This lake is not in their charter, and no transfer of ownership was ever filed. A simple, clear legal truth. All those fines, illegal. All those warnings, meaningless. All Megan's confidence, fake." That's when something clicked in my mind. Megan wasn't abusing power she had. She was pretending to have power she desperately wanted. Her obsession suddenly made sense. "You said a private investor owns it," I said. "Where are they now?" The clerk folded his hands together. "That's the part you need to hear carefully." He lowered his voice. "The lake is about to be sold. The current owner filed a notice 2 months ago." My heart thudded. "Sold to who?" He hesitated, then said, "Well, your HOA president has already contacted the seller. She's been trying to buy the lake herself." The ground felt like it shifted under me. Megan didn't just want control. She wanted the entire lake, and she was close to getting it. The moment I walked out of the county office, the truth hit me like cold water. Megan wasn't just bullying me. She was preparing to take the entire lake. Every fine, every threat, every violation. It was all part of a plan to scare homeowners into compliance while she positioned herself to buy what she claimed to already control. And if she succeeded, I knew exactly what would happen next. I would lose the last real connection I had to my father. I couldn't let that happen. So I called the seller that same afternoon. His name was Richard, a man in his 70s with a slow, thoughtful voice. When he heard I wanted to discuss the property, he agreed to meet me at a small cafe near the county courthouse. When I arrived, he was already there, a stack of papers in front of him. He offered me a seat and I didn't waste time. "I want to know if the lake is really for sale," I said. Richard nodded. "It is. I've held on to it for years, but I'm ready to let it go. The taxes, the upkeep, it's time." I took a deep breath. "Has anyone else contacted you about buying it?" Richard studied me carefully before answering. "Yes. A woman named Megan. Claims to be the HOA president. She said the association wants full control of the lake for community improvement." She sounded eager. My stomach clenched. Eager was an understatement. I could only imagine how much power she thought she'd gain if she owned the lake outright. And if she bought it, I knew she'd use that power to make my life, and possibly every life in the neighborhood, a nightmare. Still, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. She offered above asking, Richard added quietly. My heart sank. I didn't have deep pockets. All I had was the money my father left me. Money I'd been saving for emergencies, maybe even retirement. Money that felt too heavy to touch, because spending it felt like letting go of a piece of him. But right now, keeping the lake safe felt more important than holding on to the savings. I leaned back, staring at the tabletop, remembering my father's voice. A man fights hardest for what he loves. That lake wasn't just a body of water. It was mornings with him. Laughter, lessons, peace. It was everything I had left of him. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. Richard, I want to buy the lake. Not for business, not for development. I just want to protect it. For the first time, the old man smiled. A genuine smile. Soft and knowing. You're the first person I've talked to who said that, he said. Everyone else sees value. You see meaning. He shuffled through the papers, pulling out the purchase information. But, he continued carefully, I need you to understand something. Megan is serious, and she's moving fast. She told me she'd have the funds ready within days. My pulse quickened. How long do I have to decide? Richard closed the folder and slid it toward me. I'll give you first chance, he said, but you have 48 hours. After that, I'll have to go with the HOA president. 48 hours. 2 days to decide whether I was willing to spend my father's inheritance, to save the place he loved the most. 2 days. That's all the time I had to decide whether I was willing to risk the last of what my father left me to save the place that held his memory. But in truth, I made the decision long before those 48 hours ran out. I knew what I had to do. I knew what he would have wanted me to do. So when I met Richard again, this time in his lawyer's office, my hands trembled as I signed the first set of papers. Not from fear, but from the weight of what this choice meant. Every stroke of the pen felt like laying a brick in a wall between my peace and Megan's control. And with each signature, something inside me steadied. When the final document slid toward me, I paused for a moment. I closed my eyes and pictured my father standing at the end of the dock, the sunrise glowing on the water behind him, smiling at me the way he always did when I finally got the cast right. Then I picked up the pen and signed my name. Richard reached across the table and shook my hand. Congratulations, he said with a warm smile. You're now the official owner of the entire lake. The words hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened with a mix of pride, relief, and something close to grief. For months, it felt like the HOA, and Megan in particular, had been taking everything from me, my peace, my dignity, my sense of safety. But in that moment, with the deed in my hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control, strength, and my father, like he was standing right behind me, nodding in approval. Legally, owning the lake meant something simple but powerful. I controlled who used it, who accessed it, who stepped foot on its waters. The HOA had absolutely no authority over it. Not its rules, not its usage, not its restrictions. Their hold on me had been nothing but intimidation. That knowledge alone made the months of stress feel lighter. For the first time, I felt like the harassment had a clear ending. When I got back home, Tom spotted me walking up the driveway holding the deed folder. His eyes widened. Did you? He asked. I nodded. He let out a low whistle and laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. Megan's gonna have a heart attack when she hears about this. Some neighbors who had kept their distance before now peeked out from their porches. Word spread. Quickly. Whispers drifting across the yards like wind carrying sparks. Some people looked relieved. Others looked scared. Everyone knew this meant Megan's power trip was about to hit a wall. I didn't buy the lake to start a war, but I wasn't going to keep letting them walk all over me either. My next steps had to be careful, legal, and firm. I wanted peace, not chaos. I wanted fairness, not revenge, but I wasn't going to hide anymore. That evening, just as I was finally starting to breathe easier, a sharp knock echoed through the house. I opened the door to find an HOA envelope taped to the wood, thicker, more formal than usual. Inside was a printed notice, "Emergency HOA meeting, attendance required." And at the bottom, written in Megan's handwriting, "We need to talk." Walking into the HOA meeting that night felt different from all the other times. Before, I walked in afraid, unsure of what they would do next, unsure of how far they would push me. But this time, I walked in holding the one thing that could finally shut them down. The deed to the lake rested in my hand, still warm from where I'd gripped it the whole drive over. The clubhouse was packed, board members on one side, residents on the other, and Megan standing at the front like she owned the place. Her eyes locked onto me the moment I stepped inside. I could see the anger flare in them, the kind of anger that comes when someone realizes their control is slipping. "You're late," she said sharply. I ignored the tone, walked straight to the table, and slowly placed the deed in the center. The sound of the folder hitting the wood echoed through the room. People leaned forward. The chatter faded until the only thing left was silence. Megan frowned. "What is this supposed to be?" I took a breath, looked every board member in the eye, and said, "This is the deed to the lake. I bought it. I own it." The room froze. Megan's expression changed instantly. The anger in her eyes flickered into something I had never seen before. Fear. She grabbed the folder, flipped through the pages, then looked back at me with disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's legal," I replied. "Stamped, filed, verified at the county office earlier today. The HOA doesn't own the lake. You never did, and now you never will." The room erupted. Board members started talking over one another. Some demanded proof, others questioned Megan, and a few looked shocked enough to stand up from their chairs. One man pointed at her and said, "You told us the lake was under HOA control." Another board member added, "You said he was breaking rules. You said we had authority." Megan tried to regain control, raising her voice, telling everyone to calm down, but they weren't listening anymore. The spell she had over them was breaking right in front of me. That's when Linda stood up. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I'm done," she said. "I can't keep supporting lies. I've watched you bully him, scare the neighbors, and twist the rules. This isn't leadership, Megan. It's corruption." Gasps filled the room as she removed her HOA badge and set it on the table. "I resign," she said, and walked out without looking back. For the first time in months, I felt something inside me loosen. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the beginning of justice. The truth was finally out in the open, and Megan couldn't twist it anymore. I stood up from my chair. "From this point forward," I said calmly, "the HOA has no authority over who uses the lake. Any fines, threats, or warnings related to lake access are invalid. If anyone feels pressured or threatened, come talk to me. I'll show you the documents myself." That should have been the end of it, but Megan wasn't finished. She stepped toward me, her jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. She leaned in close enough that only I could hear her. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I will destroy everything you love before I let you win." Her words hit me harder than any fine ever could, because I knew she meant them. I thought owning the lake would finally bring me peace. I thought Megan would give up once the truth was out, once everyone saw she had no power left to stand on. But if anything, losing control made her more dangerous. And the very next morning, I learned just how far she was willing to go. It was barely sunrise when I heard pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. I opened it to find two county environmental officers standing on my porch, clipboards in hand, serious expressions on their faces. "Sir," one of them said, "we received a report that you've been dumping chemicals into the lake." For a second, I couldn't even speak. Dumping chemicals? I hadn't even used anything stronger than dish soap in weeks. "That report is false," I finally managed. "Who filed it?" The officer exchanged a look with his partner. The report came from your HOA president. Of course it did. They inspected the shoreline, the dock, the surrounding grounds. After half an hour, the lead officer came back and said, "There's no evidence of contamination. The claim seems unfounded, but we have to file our findings officially." I nodded, exhausted already. I understand. But that was only the beginning. Over the next week, more officials showed up at my house. Wildlife authorities, noise ordinance officers, even a county safety inspector. Each time they told me the same thing. "We received a complaint. The HOA filed a report. Your name was mentioned. Every accusation was a lie." Wildlife harm? False. Noise violations? I go to bed by 9. Dumping trash? I spend half my mornings picking up trash left by other residents. The pressure was constant, draining. Every sunrise became a moment of fear instead of peace. Fear of who would show up next, fear of what claim Megan would invent, fear of what she might do if the county didn't stop her. One evening, fed up and tired, I visited the county office again to speak directly with a senior official. I explained everything. The spying, the harassment, the fake violations, the lake ownership, and now the stream of false reports. The official listened quietly, taking notes, and finally said, "If she's filing false claims knowingly, that's a serious offense. Environmental and wildlife reports carry heavy penalties if abused. We're going to start looking into her." It wasn't a solution, not yet, but it was the first sign that someone besides me finally saw what was happening, and that gave me enough strength to keep fighting. So I began preparing. I gathered every document, every violation slip, every letter. I organized the lake deed and ownership records. I spoke with a lawyer recommended by Tom, a sharp, steady man who didn't flinch when I told him what the HOA had been doing. "This isn't uncommon," he said. "Power-hungry HOAs push boundaries until someone pushes back, and you're pushing back now. Good, because they're not finished." He was right. The very next week, I received a thick envelope from the HOA's attorney. Inside was a lawsuit, 8 pages long, claiming my lake purchase was invalid and demanding the sale be reversed. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to take the lake away from me completely. Sitting in that courtroom felt like sitting at the edge of a cliff. One wrong move, one unfair ruling, and everything I had fought for, the lake, my peace, my dignity, could come crashing down. My hands trembled as I held the folder of documents my lawyer told me to bring. I kept thinking about my father, about how proud he'd been when I bought the house, about how angry he would have been to see how much this HOA had taken from me. Megan walked into the courtroom like she owned it, chin high, shoulders squared, heels clicking sharply on the floor. She didn't look nervous. She looked confident, almost smug. It was as if she believed she couldn't lose. Her attorney sat beside her with a stack of papers, likely the same false accusations she had been throwing at me for months. My lawyer leaned closer and whispered, "Stay calm. We have everything we need." I nodded, but my stomach stayed tight. The judge entered, and the room shifted into complete silence. The HOA's attorney spoke first, laying out a dramatic list of claims. Mismanagement of shoreline responsibilities, failure to comply with HOA lake regulations, and the allegation that my purchase of the lake violated some unwritten community expectation. They talked as if the lake belonged to the neighborhood, a shared treasure that I had somehow stolen. But when it was our turn, everything changed. My lawyer stood, walked to the center of the courtroom, and placed a thick binder on the table. "Your Honor," he began, "the HOA's claims are not only false, they were created through deliberate misrepresentation and abuse of authority." Then he opened the binder. Inside were printed emails Megan had never imagined would see daylight. Emails where she pressured board members to support false violations. Emails where she used HOA funds to hire a private consultant to create fabricated lake usage rules. Emails where she talked about her plan to buy the lake and correct years of resident disobedience. Once she controlled it, the courtroom shifted. Even the judge leaned forward. But it didn't stop there. My lawyer presented bank statements showing unauthorized transfers from HOA funds to accounts tied to her private consultant. Documents showing she ordered the installation of monitoring equipment, which matched the model of the camera I found in the trees. And finally, the lake deed itself, filed legally, properly transferred, verified by the county. When he finished, he stepped back and said, "Your Honor, this case is not about community rules. It is about one person's desire for power and the lengths she was willing to go to take property that did not belong to her." For the first time, Megan's face cracked. Her confidence faded. She whispered urgently to her attorney, shaking her head as if trying to undo everything that had just been revealed. The judge cleared his throat and spoke slowly, firmly. "The court recognizes Mr. Harris as the rightful and legal owner of the lake. The HOA has no authority over it. Furthermore, due to clear evidence of harassment, false reporting, and misuse of funds, this lawsuit is dismissed." The relief hit me so hard I nearly sank into my chair. It felt like months of fear, anxiety, and helplessness drained out of me in a single breath. Then the judge continued, "The HOA will reimburse Mr. Harris for all legal fees and refund any fines issued under false pretenses. Additionally, Ms. Carlisle," he looked directly at Megan, "may face separate investigation for her actions." Megan's face turned pale. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Court adjourned, and people began gathering their things. I stood, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. I thought maybe, finally, this nightmare was over. But as I passed Megan on my way out, she leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't finished," she said. "You have no idea what you've started." A chill ran straight through me. Because I believed her. The morning after the court ruling, I woke before sunrise. Not because I was anxious or afraid, but because something inside me finally felt light enough to breathe again. The sky was still dark blue when I stepped out onto the dock. The same dock where everything had begun. For the first time in months, my hands didn't tremble when I held my father's old fishing rod. My chest didn't feel tight. And the lake looked calm, as if it had been waiting for me to come back. When I cast my line into the water, a quiet settled around me that I hadn't felt in far too long. No footsteps behind me, no clipboards, no sharp voices telling me what I could or couldn't do. Just the soft sound of water touching the shore and the early morning birds waking up one by one. It felt like my father was standing beside me again, the way he used to, nodding in approval as I waited for the line to tighten. That's when I heard someone walking up behind me. Not fast, not aggressively, but gently, like they didn't want to startle me. I turned to see Tom standing there with 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might want one," he said. I smiled and took it. "Feels different today," I told him. He nodded. "Whole neighborhood feels different. People finally saw what she was doing. They're realizing things need to change." And he was right. Later that afternoon, several neighbors came by. People who had avoided me for months. People who once looked at me like I was the problem. They apologized. They explained they didn't know the truth. Some of them admitted they were afraid to speak up because Megan frightened them too. One couple told me, "We're glad you fought back. You made it safer for the rest of us." The HOA board didn't waste time either. Megan was removed from her position immediately, and the remaining members scheduled an emergency election for new leadership. Linda returned temporarily to help clean up the mess Megan had left behind, though she said she didn't want the president's role. "I just want this neighborhood to feel normal again," she said. For the first time since buying this home, I felt like the community around me was beginning to heal. The fear that had hung over the neighborhood was fading, replaced by a quiet hopefulness. I felt it in the way neighbors waved, in the way people smiled again, in the way children played near the shoreline without being scolded for imaginary rule violations. But underneath that peace, a single thought kept creeping back into my mind. How close did I come to losing all of this? Just weeks earlier, I had believed the HOA controlled everything. I had believed their lies, their threats, their made-up rules. I had almost let them take away the only place that truly made me feel connected to my father. And that thought shook me, because if I hadn't fought back, if I hadn't checked the records, if I hadn't taken a stand, Megan would have won. And just when I started to relax, just when I thought all the secrets were out, I found something that made my heart drop all over again. Later that evening, while helping Linda clean up old HOA files, I opened a drawer in the storage room and pulled out a rolled-up blueprint. When I unrolled it across the table, I froze. It was a detailed plan, stamped, labeled, and approved for a private marina. A marina Megan had been planning to build on the lake. When I unrolled that blueprint across the table, everything suddenly clicked into place. The docks, the walkways, the parking area, the fenced-off shoreline. It wasn't just a marina. It was a full private development plan. Megan hadn't been fighting me because she cared about rules or community standards. She had been fighting me because owning the lake meant owning the future of this neighborhood. And her plan didn't stop at the water. The drawing showed several shoreline homes marked in red, including mine. Notes in the margins explained possible acquisition, long-term buyout strategies, and even projections for how much the HOA could profit if the marina became reality. I stared at those red marks, feeling a cold heaviness settle in my chest. She hadn't just been trying to control me. She wanted my land. She wanted my home. She wanted the memories tied to this lake, the ones I had spent a lifetime holding close. If I hadn't fought back, I would have lost everything my father passed down to me. A quiet anger rose in me, not the kind that makes you shout, but the kind that makes you stand straighter, the kind that reminds you what matters. I thought back to the mornings on the dock with my father, his voice patient as he taught me how to cast. I thought about how he always told me, if something is worth loving, it's worth protecting. At the time, I thought he was talking about fishing. Now I realized he meant far more than that. Looking at those blueprints, I finally understood just how important it had been to fight, not just for the lake, not just for my home, but for the right to live in peace without someone trying to use fear and power to take it away. Linda, standing beside me, shook her head slowly. She would have destroyed the whole community just to get what she wanted, she said. People trusted her, and she used that trust to nearly ruin my life, I replied. But even as the anger pulsed through me, something else stirred. Gratitude. Gratitude that I didn't stay quiet. Gratitude that I listened to that voice inside me telling me to push back. Gratitude that the truth came out before the damage was permanent. If there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's that you can't assume an HOA has the power it claims to have. They count on fear, confusion, and silence. They count on people not checking the facts. But the law is simple. An HOA cannot enforce authority over land it does not own. And if I hadn't verified that through the county, Megan would have taken everything from me. As I rolled up the blueprint again, I took a deep breath. The lake outside was quiet, peaceful, mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move forward, not as a victim of HOA abuse, but as someone who stood up and protected what mattered. If you're listening to this, if you've ever felt bullied by an HOA or pushed around by someone in power, remember this: your home is worth fighting for. Your peace is worth fighting for. And your rights are yours to defend, no matter who tries to take them away. Because sometimes the only thing standing between losing everything and keeping what you love is the moment you decide to stand up and say, no more.